Hello, I'm Ollie and this is CriminOlly, where I talk about crime, pulp, horror, that kind of thing. Today, car crash pornography, I'm going to be talking about the novel Crash by JG Ballard. So this is one of the books I'm reading for my ongoing project to read disturbing books that were recommended to me in the comments by viewers. This is one that I have actually had a copy of for a while and been meaning to get to for a while. So I read Ballard's novel High Rise a few years ago and really liked that. And this is similar in many ways to High Rise. It's got a lot of the same kind of similar themes about modernity and the effect of modernity on human beings. So definitely a disturbing book and definitely an interesting book. But it does make me question, as I do every so often when I'm talking about more complicated books on the channel, whether I'm really smart enough to do this or not. So you can judge for yourself at the end of this whether you think I am. I did struggle a bit with some of the concepts in this book, and it's definitely in many ways a challenging read. So let me tell you what the plot is. And that 3-word synopsis I used in the introduction, car crash pornography, pretty much sums it up, to be honest with you. And Ballard himself describes this book as pornography. So it's a book about a group of people who fetishise car crashes. And in particular, two characters, Ballard, who is like the narrator and, the central character. So the author himself is a character in the book. And a character called Vaughan, who's a kind of filmmaker who's obsessed with car crashes. And as the book, well, it's not even as the book progresses, because the first chapter of the book immediately immerses you in this bizarre world where people basically get off on sex involving cars and in particular car crashes. And the book, gradually explores that theme. So the first chapter is, as I say, just throws you immediately into that and is quite bewildering and a really difficult chapter to read. After that, the book becomes a bit more straightforward in that it becomes a flashback of how Ballard, the central character, was involved in a car crash and subsequently met this character of Vaughan and became involved in this bizarre world of car crash fetishism. So it has got something like a regular plot and a normal plot, and it does build up to a recognisable climax, as there is a particular thing that is being discussed by the characters in the book, and it builds up to that thing happening. But it's definitely not, whilst it might have something like a normal plot, it's definitely not a normal book. And like some of the other disturbing books I've read recently, so thinking of books like The 120 Days of Sodom by the Marquis de Sade and Hog by Samuel Delaney, it's a book that uses repetition. So you see similar things happening again and again and again in this book, and most of those things are people having sex in cars and people getting off on car crashes, basically. So if those things don't appeal to you, it may not be the right book for you. But it does that in a way that doesn't feel overwhelming. Or it doesn't get to the point where it's boring. Let's put it that way. So I said in my review of 120 Days of Sodom that is definitely a book that gets boring after a while because it's just the same thing again and again and again. And people have made that observation of Hog by Delaney as well. I didn't find Hog boring, but I can get why some people did. Crash, I think, manages to have enough going on kind of plot-wise and character development-wise that you don't get bored by the repetition, but there is definitely repetition in it. And in terms of characters and character development, one of the things I struggle with a bit in this book is that the characters do feel quite distant. What Ballard is writing about is something that's so bizarre and so horrific at times that it can be difficult to make a connection with the characters, and the characters do often feel quite emotionless. I certainly felt no emotional connection with any of them. So it's kind of a fascinating book, and a book that you kind of can't stop reading because you want to see what happens next and where he takes it. But it's not a book that I felt a great deal of emotional involvement with. And where I think about my own relationship with disturbing books, and what I'm learning about that relationship through this project of reading a bunch of disturbing books, I think for me the books that really disturb me are the books where I do make that emotional connection with the characters. And as I say, in Crash I didn't do that. So whilst it's definitely a horrific book, and there's elements of disturbing in it, I didn't find it deeply disturbing. So let's talk about the why. And I think the why is always important with these kind of discussions. So why did Ballard write this book? Why did he write a book about people fetishising car crashes? And it's worth thinking about his work more broadly. So he wrote a lot of books. High Rise, which I mentioned at the start, I've read, and that there are a lot of similarities with Crash in terms of its depiction of the world, and it turns out that the Collins English Dictionary even has the word Ballardian in it, which is describes the style of book that he wrote. And so their definition of Ballardian is so resembling or suggestive of the conditions described in JG Ballard's novels and stories, especially dystopian modernity, bleak man-made landscapes, and the psychological effects of technology, social or environmental developments. And helpfully, this edition of Crash has an introduction by Ballard, written in 1995. So the book itself was written in 1973, and he talks about his motivations for writing the book. And talks about his kind of alarm at the epidemic of violence on the roads as he sees it, as the statistics of fatalities in car crashes just keep going up and up, and I think reflects a bit on our obsession with the motor vehicle as both a means of transportation, but also as kind of a status symbol, as something that people feel like they have to have. And I think when we reflect now in the in the 2020s on the impact of car ownership on the world, and that's something Ballard doesn't even get into, the environmental side of things. He's talking about very much about the impact on human beings of both car crashes themselves, but also just of roads. So just of the need for there to be roads everywhere that take up space, that are just big grey blocks of concrete that disrupt the landscape. And are just depressing to look at. Roads are just depressing, aren't they? Well, they are to me anyway. So if we think in the 2020s about the impact that car ownership has had on the environment, that gives this book a whole other angle as well, I think. So Ballard was really interested in the impact of technology on the world, and that seems to me very much what Crash is about. So it's about as I say, our obsession with cars, and takes that to an extreme. The other thing that occurred to me reading it is it's very much about like mechanisation, and a lot of the fetishisation is about the mechanical details of the cars, and I did wonder if part of it, and he doesn't explicitly say this in his introduction, but part of it was a kind of response to the mechanised slaughter of the Second World War. So the First World War did this to an extent, the Second World War even more, the kind of industrialisation of death through both like the Nazi death camps and things like that, and also the atomic bomb. And Ballard was involved in the Second World War to the extent that he was a child in Singapore. So that's where he grew up, and I think he was in a Japanese prisoner of war camp or some kind of camp for a while, and his experiences of that are detailed in his novel Empire of the Sun, which was later filmed by Spielberg. So it definitely feels, I've talked in my videos about 70s horror recently, about the spectre of the Second World War, looming over those decades after it. It definitely feels to me like that is part of Crash. So is it a book that achieves its aims? And I think by and large it is. And a lot of the disturbing books I've talked about so far, I haven't necessarily really been able to pin down why the author made the choices they made in the book. But with Crash, I think I can. It feels like a very well-formed work. And I can see why it's the book that it is, given Ballard's intention going into it. So yeah, a very interesting book, a very challenging book, but a very readable book as well. Despite the grossness of it and the disturbing nature of it and the very graphic nature of it at times, I found it was a book I couldn't put down, and definitely very much enjoyed. Okay, time for a random book from the shelves. This is another book about weird fetishes, but one that is far more amusing than Crash. Is Liarmouth by John Waters, which is one of the most disgusting books I've ever read, but consistently hilarious throughout as well. So definitely recommended if you fancy something about fetishes that's not quite as disturbing as Crash. So I hope you found that interesting. Let me know if you've read Crash. Let me know if you've read other books by Ballard and there are any in particular you think I should read. And as always, thanks very much for watching. I hope you're safe and well out there. I hope you're reading good stuff, and I'll speak to you again very soon. Cheerio.